show your appreciation for the fact that he's come all the way down from Sligo to speak to you today. So without further ado, I'll hand you over now to the great maestro himself. So if you could give him a great round of applause, that would be great.
Thanks, Una. Can you hear me okay? Yes. I'll be talking at this volume. There's no microphone on. Can you believe this? A pagan on a pulpit of a church. But my grandmother's probably spinning in her grave. But it's a beautiful location. You know, a lot of these old churches, particularly these in the old Anglo-Norman style, were actually built on sites that they were pagan sites beforehand. There'd be wells, or there'd be standing stones, or there'd be groves, or something else that our ancestors, who are just as much valid in the history of our country and as the legacy of who we are today. We wouldn't be here today if we didn't have the ancestors who went back thousands of years, who never heard of the Middle East, who never heard of the Abrahamic religions. And they're just as much part of the story of this country and all our artistic and spiritual heritage as anyone who ever came in the period after the St. Patrick came into the Roman Empire and we were converted to Christianity. So always remember that your existence is a continuum, and this is just, the story of Christianity in Ireland is a role that's valid too. No one is better than anyone else. It's a continuous continuum that goes back thousands and probably 12,000 years, at least to the Proto-Europeans, who we know from the DNA research probably came to Ireland from the Iberian Peninsula, originally from Sardinia. We don't know a lot more before that. And then the Indo-Europeans came about 6,000 years ago, and that was basically how we became the Celtic Gaelic people from that point on. So we have a spectacularly ancient history on this island that may even be older. This is just, I'm only going by official history because I don't know how many of you are new to my work, but if you've seen my other work, I believe there was actually a previous civilization to this one. And the telltale signs of this are just they're indisputable when you start looking at the evidence. But I'm going to talk about today, the first thing I want to say is I don't care what your religion is. I don't care if you're an atheist. I'm not here to challenge anybody. I'm not here to upset or question anybody. I don't care if you worship a budgie. It's none of my business, okay? I'm just coming from a point of view of somebody who, through the course of his life, and I've had quite an interesting life. I was born in the Ballymun Flats in Ballymun in North Dublin, which is basically considered the worst ghetto in Ireland, and it was. And from there I worked myself up to being in a managerial position in Wall Street at Goldman Sachs in the communications department. So that was just purely, that's the journey to that was through the music industry and other things. And so I've had by the time, before I was even in my late 30s, mid-30s, I had a very interesting life experience that allowed me to see life from every facet. And it struck me from a very early on period that regardless of a person's beliefs, social status, religion, race, identity, that human beings were essentially the same. There was a sort of a demarcation line between different people. So, for instance, when I was growing up in Ballymun, we were told that anyone who had money was a snob. Then I counted people with snob and found that had money that I was told were all up their noses in the air, and there were some beautiful people in the world, and kindest and helpful people to me in my life, because they wanted to help me. They saw something in me. And I met people, and in Wall Street, many people would say, they're all gangsters and robbers. Some of the most decent people I've ever met work on Wall Street. They're just trying to make a good living for their families. So very early in my life, the sort of stereotypes that we're raised with, that that everyone has a kind of a stereotype, they started to demolish very quickly. And I started to realize that no matter where someone came in the world, they fitted a particular archetype. And this became amazing to me when I started to read the work of Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist. Joseph Campbell is an American mythologist who basically looked at the mythology of the world. Now, he wasn't the first to do it, but he brought it to a mass audience through a series of interviews he did with an American TV presenter called Bill Myers, and it was called The Hero with 1,000 Faces, named after a book he'd written. And to say that this thing transformed my life would be an understatement. He showed how, and the books were even more in depth, and that basically mythology all over the world, regardless of the root culture, or the religious spiritual tradition, they were all very similar. And they were all rooted in the concept of Carl Jung's archetypes, the belief that all of us at some level fit into a specific type of person. This is when you watch a movie, like a classic movie would be The Lord of the Rings. Someone is a wizard, someone is a thief, someone is a lover, someone is an idealist, some are artistic, some are problem solvers, some are pathological, some are negative, some are toxic. But people fit into, generally, those archetypes. Not always exclusively, but there'll be a dominant aspect of their personality where you will look at them. And this is why these stories, even movies like The Magnificent Seven, which was based on a Japanese movie called The Seven Samurai, was also based on this archetypal notion of, salvation is delivered from it. So you're not trapped in your archetype. From your upbringing, from your background, you may have an archetype of my archetype was someone who was trapped into the class system when I was younger. By the time I was 25, I realized this is a load of bullshit. This doesn't exist. It's not real. The same thing with these archetypes. Like you have like the characters in the film The Magnificent Seven, where they're just there in the village to get the money. Yeah, they don't really care about the Mexicans they're protecting from the bandits. But as they start to look at themselves and look at the people, they realize that they have a higher calling to the point where they won't walk away. The money doesn't matter anymore. And someone who was totally self-absorbed dies for a villager, a Mexican villager, that previous to that he wouldn't have cared about, because he realized his road, his journey, his archetype, his own personal mythology, his monomyth, was now developing. And you will find that at every point in your life, there was a point that something negative may have happened that could have destroyed you. Now, like there's young people here, that hasn't happened to them. Their job is to enjoy their lives and have fun. But those of us who pass middle age, or even in your early 20s, it will happen. A crisis thing will come along. A long-term relationship will fall apart. You'll lose your business. You will have the love of your life taken from you, whatever. And what should destroy you, and I don't mean to be twee, to sort of, play down those of you who've had terrible tragedies, but you realise that you're forced to look at yourself in the mirror, and for the first time in your life you'll say to yourself, well, who am I and what am I meant to be? What brought me here and how do I get out of this? And that's the beginning of your own personal monomyth. And if you look at Joseph Campbell's work, he came up with a cycle of the monomyth, which starts as you set out on life, you may have idealistic notions, you may have selfish notions, and then there's a call to adventure, and then there's the crisis, and along the way you meet a temptress, or in the case of a woman, I don't know what you call it, a male temptress, a womanizer, whatever. You'd encounter a wizard who would solve a problem for you or make you think the impossible happen. Like, how am I going to get out of this financial situation? And someone comes along out of the blue and says, well, you have this asset that you haven't really capitalized on, and that's the wizard. you might find yourself in danger, and then your champion or your warrior comes along. And then from this you start to realize, oh my God, there's a real meaning and a real trajectory to life that takes place. And it's not, I'm not necessarily a bag of, neurochemicals, electromagnetic signals, hormones, proteins, and other, various chemicals. There's actually something more to this. There's a meaning to it. Otherwise, it would just be a purely kind of animalistic kind of experience. This is the concept of noetics. You understand that with the ancient Greeks, it comes out of somewhere, and you realize, okay, there's a little bit more to this than life meets the eye. There's a bit more to here. And that's a spiritual experience. And I often say to people who say to me, I went to Sedona, or I went to Glastonbury, and I met this shaman, and we were banging the drum. And it was so spiritual. And I said, you never had a spiritual experience. You met some gobshite with a drum. That's all you had. How dare you? How dare you? And I say, did you ever have a horrific crisis in your life that you had to draw on every element of your being, every part of you, and pull yourself out of it, and you survived it? That was your spiritual experience. It's like the old thing. It's like, I believe in spirits. Well, define spirits. Are they angels or demons? The world, the universe is made up of polarities of shadows, light and shadow, negative and positive, male and female. They're all built on these polarities. These polarities represent natural law. Natural law is the fundamental operating system, though I hate using that word. We should say, fundamentals of the universe. And these fundamentals, they cannot be broken. And this is why corrupt politicians always get found out. This is why anyone who has a pathological existence will be found out. Anyone who has a political belief based purely on dogma, or a religious belief based purely on dogma. I believe this because I read that. I believe this because he said that. You will eventually fall out of natural law, because it's not something that you necessarily believe. It's something you acquired. It's something you acquired. This is why I stay the hell away from all politics, left wing, right wing. I'm an anarchist. I want nothing to do with any of it, because I understand that it's all dogmatic and orthodoxy driven, and therefore it's ultimately, though it may have good things in some parts, on another parts, ultimately it's not a natural system. It's an artificial construct, and that artificial construct does not serve my monomyth, right? So that was my life. I discovered that there was a very interesting life. I'll put it this way: I discovered that life was a far more interesting journey than what they told me about in the Ballymount Comprehensive. It was like, and then I was like pissed off. Sorry. Then I was annoyed, and I was like, how come I was never taught this in school? How come I was not given these tools, this toolkit of survival, to help me with this? And a kind of conspiratorial thing grew in me, in that I started to believe they don't want us to have this level of knowledge about the self, the monomyth, the archetypes, the true meaning of mythology. And I started to, it wouldn't be any good for religion. It wouldn't be any good for politics. No politician is going to ever say to you, it really doesn't matter what I tell you, it's up to yourself. You know what I'm saying? And I've actually met Catholic and Protestant priests and Jewish rabbis who said to me, and you're absolutely right, that's why I don't preach that way. I say I help people, but I don't minister to them. I don't tell them. I don't lecture them. So there's plenty of people in the traditional religions who do that, So it's like, then again, what does that tell us? It always comes down to the individual. This is why I'm very suspicious of collectives. Yeah, I don't believe in, you have these isms. Why should you dissolve yourself into the ism? You were not born for this purpose. You were not born to dissolve yourself into the ism. You were born to actually to live your monomyth, right? So then there was other things that took my interest. I started to say, Well, we have religious parables and stories, but is that really? Sure, some of them really are, and this kind of was like they opened the door to me to other religions, particularly Hinduism and things like that. And these doors opened, and I discovered the work of, I think he's Austrian, a writer and a psychologist called Bruno Bettelheim. And he wrote this remarkable book called The Uses of Enchantment. And he showed that European fairy tales were much darker than the ones that Disney give to us. Oh my God, the original Grimm's fairy tales, and they're very, very dark. And the purpose of these was to teach children at a very early age, without frightening them, almost to put a kind of what you call it when they put something on your cookie in an operating system, but to put a kind of a subconscious idea, defense system, antivirus, in the lower poles of your cognition. So when a child grew up and encountered these pathological events in real life, they will meet the old couple that tried to cook Hansel and Gretel. They will meet the wolf that read Riding Hood. That these were actually ways that our ancestors, and Irish mythology is full of this stuff, and this is what Arthurian legends are about as well, and the Nordic legends. There were ways of teaching young people and people who were illiterate, here is the operating system that can help you get through life. Without terrorizing the child, without saying, there's horrible people out there who'll do terrible things to you. No child can hear that because they will give up on life. But what they do is they had fairy tales. And how these fairy tales developed is very interesting. You can't really go back and find someone who wrote fairy tales like, what's the root of them? They go back into absolute incredible antiquity. In fact, the University of Durham in England and some university in Portugal, about 10 years ago, did a combined research program where they took certain phrases, phraseology, concepts, and things happening in all different fairy tales from all over the world, right? So, and they found there were certain commonalities. And what they found was, using the same software they used to find the evolutionary paths of plants and flora, they discovered that some of these stories were spectacularly ancient. Like anything to do with a smith, like a smith that works, hammering, that went way back to the Bronze Age. Now just think about that. They went back to the time of the second level of megalithic builders. So they've been around forever. Those stories have always been around. And again, our ancestors had this innate noetic notion that the world was a different place, that there was what we now call a spiritual or paranormal dimension, that they were not just, their ancient ancestors were not just, cold, subhuman monkeys, not by the artwork they've left on caves in southern France and stuff. These were a deep, and if you read books like The Mind in the Cave and The Neolithic Mind by Lewis, you see that these were people with rich emotional lives, rich psychological lives, even the Neanderthals who built ritualistic, stone circles inside their caves out of the stalagmites that they took off the cave and put them upside down on the ground in shapes. They were looking for something. But what the early ancestors realized was that this material universe is not necessarily material. In fact, you can change it. And this was the beginning of what we call magic. Now, magic is the use, I'll put, here I'm in a church, I'm going to quote Aleister Crowley, but Aleister Crowley said that magic is the use of intention and will in order to make change in the material world. In other words, a creative act. So magic is basically simple. If you are a carpenter and you want to build a table, you first see it as a picture in your mind. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in this material universe. Then you draw it down on a piece of paper. That's the spell. And then you build the table. And you've taken something that existed in the world of magic, the world of thought, the world of consciousness, and brought it into the material world. That's all magic is. So this church was one time in ruins, right? It was a ruined church. It was derelict. someone had the idea, wouldn't this be a fantastic community centre for the town, right? So that was the intention. They hired an architect. The architect drew up the plans. That was the spell. That was the actual the actual thing. And then they hired builders who fixed it. And then we had something that didn't exist before, now existing in this reality, that started as someone's fleeting conscious idea in the background. Right? That's all magic is. Now, our ancient ancestors in the Paleolithic period, they started to draw cave art on the walls, and all their cave art all shows basically the same thing. Animals that they're hunting, bison, deer, all the things, aurochs, all the animals that they hunt for food. And what they were doing was they were creating magic. And they were all the pictures they have drawn, you will see the animal has had the spears or the arrows in it. They have already captured it. And somehow they discovered that if they built up their nervous system and their level of consciousness through drawing and meditating in the dark, very important, because in the darkness, peering at that cave art, the concentration and the focus of the nervous system is intense because everything else is blocked out. They discovered that they were actually able to hunt more animals. Now, you could say, well, it could be just a kind of an evolutionary thing that they did. They made their skills better. But even that is fascinating. Right? No, they actually learned to use these paintings to make them better hunters, to survive. And we're here because of it. And that was the beginning of magic and the actual, what we call spirituality, religion. Because they understand that through ritual, you could help things, you could change things. And that goes all through all the religions and all the, right up to today. There's a belief that's a prayer or an incantation or a something like that. Now, and we have what we call miracles. What a miracle is magic. It's just something that they put all their work into and it came into manifestation. And they did it themselves, but and they will also often employ agency to it, like I prayed to St. Jude for this, or I went to Mecca and did that, I went to the Wailing Wall and did that. But that agency helped bring the thing into manifestation. And we call that a miracle. And that's because the operating system of the universe is malleable. This is not real where we are right now. This has been known for a long time, the Hindu concept of Maya, that this is all an illusion, and quantum physics proves that this is all an illusion. There is nothing in this room that's real except our consciousness. Everything that's in here is an agreed upon hallucination that we have all generally decided is this is what we want, this is what we're living in. And you have things like the Copenhagen experiment, which proved conclusively and has been replicated thousands of times as one of the most staunchly retested theories of quantum theory, that when they were looking at a particle, it turned to a wave, and when they turned away, it went back to a particle. You saw that in the Oppenheimer film, and they had Niels Bohr played by Kenneth Branagh, and he said, this is just so, and this is just, reality is just not what we think it is. So the observer effect proved that you only bring it into manifestation by looking at it. What's behind your head, there might be nothing there. It's because, and as crazy as that sounds, that's a scientific theorem that has been rigidly tested to the point where the winner of the Nobel Prize for Physics this year won for a concept called quantum retrocausality, where they prove that you can actually change the past by erasing it at the quantum level. So now we don't even have to have a past anymore. Now that won the Nobel Prize for Physics this year. So when people say stuff, this is all airy-fairy, nonsense, new age, whatever you want to call it, it's not. It's the most scientific thing in the world. It's just real science. It's not like the nonsense we've been subject to for the last 20 years. Scientism, kill the Brian Cox inside you and then you'll discover real science. But we live, our lives are not ordinary. Everybody, even the most staunch atheist, and will tell you they had incredible experiences, but they'll say things like, I had a friend down here in Cork, but he lived in Dublin, but he was from Cork originally, and he was a Garda detective, and we became friends. I went to a painting class with him, and we started doing watercolours around Dublin, the parks and stuff, and we became good mates, right? He's passed on now. And he used to, like, we'd have these conversations. He goes, yeah, Thomas, I know it's true, but I'm a detective. I have to live in the world of science and all this. And then he would say things like, yeah, everything you say is true, but I still can't go there. I'm still trapped because of the kind of person I am. And he was a very well-educated and intelligent man. And then he told me one day, do you remember the Marian visions at Ballyspittle out in South Cork? He said, yeah, I was there. And I said, so what was it like? Were you laughing at the people? And he says, no, the statue moved. And I said, out of the blue, he says, the statue moved, Thomas. So you're telling me as a confirmed atheist that the statue moved? And I said, well, how did it move? Did it move a finger or something? He said, no, I'm not kidding you. It actually looked around and was moving like this. And there was a collective gasp out of me and everyone else. So I said, okay, forget religion, forget all that. You saw a statue along with a few thousand people move, right? And he goes, yeah. And you don't believe that there's a supernaturalism to the universe? No. Why? It was a kind of a mass hallucination we don't understand yet. You know? So there was an open-minded man, a highly intelligent man, but he could not make that leap into the unknown. He could not make it into it. And it wasn't that he wasn't one of these Richard Dawkins types who like make fun of people who have a spiritual or a belief in a higher existence. He wasn't like that at all. Very not. He was a gentleman. But he had an experience that I would absolutely love to have. And then I saw there's a meaning in that. That's his path. That's his life. His monomyth is the scientist. That no matter how he sees or whatever he's experienced, his job is to remain rational, because we need the rational people too. You know. So when you get a lot, I mean, I go around these places and you'll meet people saying, you know, they'll have this kind of schism between the atheists and the spiritually minded people, and they say, oh, the atheists. But I said, you know, they're part of the story too, and they also help to keep us grounded. You know, if it wasn't for me, say, reading Christopher Hitchens and telling you, no, Jane, that wasn't Guinevere you saw at Glastonbury. That was a light you saw on the side of a hill. She'll say, he gave me the grounding to look at things holistically. And even with all that, I've read all the science books, and I'm a big reader of science papers. I still firmly believe that there's a spiritual, supernatural world. Why? Because it's impossible that it's just quantum theory and quantum physics alone tell us there is something more beyond this. Now, there isn't. This is one of the reasons I shy dogma, because none of us has the answers. All we have is a series of questions, and that's okay, because the journey is actually where the fruits are found. The journey is where the lessons are learned, where the wisdom and the insight, the insights come from. And because of, and again, I'm not putting down Christianity, okay? Because of the concept in Christianity of a saviour, of salvation, of somebody coming, it has stopped a lot of people in the West from seeking themselves as their own saviour. They're waiting for something to come. And you have all these flying saucer cults who are waiting for the great sky masters to come. Whether that's true or not, I don't care. But it stops people from working on themselves in the meantime. And, you know, you can see fleeting elements of this in the early days of Christianity, where you had all these sects like the Manichaeans and the Gnostics and stuff, and they were playing around with the idea that, you know, maybe, you know, there's something a bit different to this, you know, and maybe we have to try and work on ourselves to escape this, what they believed was cycles of reincarnation. This is one of the things the Gnostics believed, and then later the Cathars, who were all exterminated by the Catholic Church in southern France. And this notion that there was a little bit more, a little bit something further beyond here, that we had a bigger personal stake in it, rather than it being exclusively the will of a god. You know, this is why ancient Rome and Greece were so fantastically ahead of their times, because they were monotheists. They didn't wait for God's approval. Yet they had a pantheon of gods and goddesses, but they didn't wait for any approval or something like that. They didn't even pray. They sacrificed. Now, when people hear the word sacrifice, they think, oh my God, they killed a person or a goat or something. Sacrifice within the pagan, classic Indo-European pantheon, particularly in the classic Hellenic and Latin tradition, is to give something away, give money to the poor. This kind of thing. A sacrifice your day to help a poor person. And every class was meant to do this. In fact, in Saturnalia, which is the basis of Christmas within Christianity, was a pagan festival where the rich were supposed to look after the poor and invite them over and give them nice food to eat and give them gifts. And that's where Christianity came from. Remember, all the Christian feast days are pagan. Halloween is Samhain, Old Saints' Day, right? Easter is Ostara, it's named after a Germanic goddess. Yule is Christmas. That's the Nordic one, the Nordic festival of the winter, and it's also Mithra, which is the original religion of the Roman Empire. You know when Mithra was born, don't you? December 25th, and he was born to a virgin and died and came back to life 3 days later. They just renamed him as Jesus Christ, but they took the Jesus story and glued Mithra onto it. You will find this all through history. This is the Catholic Church. The early Catholic Church were geniuses, really. It was the Roman Empire, really. And they said, well, what do locals believe? They believe in this guy who to a tree, and he died and achieved godhood and came back. You mean like Odin, when he was nailed to the Yggdrasil tree? Yeah. Okay, well, tell them that Jesus is just like Odin. Genius, really, when you think about it, isn't it? It's genius. And they went all over the world doing this. They would find the local spiritual archetypes, and they would say, some tribe in Micronesia would say, well, our God, he had only a small amount of food, and he was able to feed the island when they were starving during it. That's one of our stories. Did you ever hear about the loaves and fishes? The same thing. And then the Jesus Christ story is a very appealing story of how it's been sold to us through the Synoptic Gospel. So it was a very powerful delivery system. But the Catholic Church were geniuses at that. The early church were absolute geniuses at attaching the old story. Like St. Bridget is the classic here in Ireland. That's a pagan goddess breed. And the St. Bridget's cross, where that way, is not actually hung that way. The pagans had it that way, and it was a swastika. Swastika! No, swastika is one of the most sacred religious symbols of the world, used everywhere. Ireland is covered in hundreds of swastikas carved onto stones that were left in pagan and early Christian times. It represented the sun, that's all, or the 4 seasons, the 4 cardinal points. And in the Nordic world, it was the hammer of Thor in motion. But it represented, it was solar deity, the sun. So this is why I don't do dogma, and I've nothing against anyone who does. If you have your staunch belief in your religion, well, I will be the first person to defend it. I will defend your right to believe and be a Christian, be a Muslim, to be a Hindu, to be an atheist. But guess what? You tried to put that on me, and I will defend myself. And that's the difference. Pagans don't do evangelism. It's not part of the pagan way of doing things. And this is why they were very easily taken over by both Islam and Christianity, because they would incorporate other gods from different pantheons into their belief system. So, for instance, a classic is Minerva. Minerva is Athena. The Romans, we like Minerva. Tell us about this. And the Greeks said, well, Athena, she's the goddess of intelligence and war. And, I like that, And so they bring in, she becomes Minerva. Diana was Artemis Diana, I mean. And so on and so on. And pagans would go, that's why you had a situation in England at the time of the Roman Empire where Minerva was practically a Celtic goddess, because the local Celtic people would see the Romans going down to the temple, and they say, what's that about? And it's Minerva. I like her story. And then they incorporate Minerva. And you see that still in the largest pagan peoples on earth in the Hindu world. Within the Hindu world, you will see pictures of Jesus Christ everywhere. If you go to, I was in Sri Lanka a few years ago, and outside I was going to the Hindu temples every day of the week to pray, to venerate, whatever you want to call it, petition, whatever word you want to use. And everyone was lovely. Everyone was beautiful. But outside the Hindu temple, inside you would have all the Hindu deities, Shiva, Kali, all them, Krishna, the lot. But outside, just in the forecourt, there was a little Muslim shrine, a little Buddhist shrine with Buddha, and a little Christian shrine. And the Hindus would come out, and they would put flowers at the foot of Buddha and the foot of Jesus, because this is how Christianity took over. The locals said, that's a pretty lovely story about the Gospels, I like that. But then corporate takeover, and then all the old religions were most of our saints are pagan gods and goddesses, just rebranded. The Romans were geniuses at this stuff, absolute geniuses. You have to give it to them. And the days of the week are all named after pagan gods. Every last Thor is Thursday, Odin is Wednesday, Freya Day, Friday. It just goes on and on. And we have not lost that. This world still exists, but it's hidden behind the material world. Now, what is the point of me being interested in all this stuff? I'll tell you what it is. Anyone who's taken an interest in this stuff, and they're automatically shifting their consciousness out of the prevailing orthodoxy. So when something goes wrong, or they've polished up on their mythology, or they're aware of things, they suddenly know they're the ones who will be the first to go, I don't trust this government policy. I don't trust it. Not because they're conspiracy theorists, although you do get those types too, absolutely. I know plenty of these whack jobs who, they think that everything is there's nothing real. But I just tell them that, take reality at some things are definitely a conspiracy, 100%. I tell them the JFK thing for starters is absolutely, anyone, or the assassination of Pope John Paul I. That's we live in an age where you have. This is kills me today. We live in an age where people think that no bad things have ever been done by powerful people. And there's some American comedian that you see him, a black guy in America, and he's talking, and he's telling a joke about the U.S. government, and he goes, and then a guy heckles him, going, conspiracy theories, and the American comedian goes, are you actually telling me that there's no such thing as a conspiracy? That the history of the human race, in the history of politics and everything else, powerful men have never got together to conspire for their own interest? And he stood there and gone, no, it never happened. That's what universities are pumping out these days. They're pumping out people who have no cynicism. I meet people under the age of say under the age of 25, 30, and they don't know about the Kennedy assassination. And they don't know about the assassination of John Paul I. And then, you say to some people have heard about, how could you prove that? Here's a book by David Yallop called In God's Name. He's one of Britain's greatest investigative journalists. And in this book, he proves conclusively, without a shadow of doubt, that Propaganda Dewey, an organised Freemasonic gang, were trying to take over and start a fascist republic in Italy, and the part of the assassination, they were getting their funding through a guy called Roberto Calvi, who was the Vatican banker and was found hanging on the Blackfriars Bridge in London in 1978. But you don't believe in conspiracy. And it all came out in court. The Italian government, it all came out, but you don't believe in conspiracy. Okay. 10 years ago, Jimmy Savile is a paedophilic, necrophiliac, lunatic psycho. No, he's not. He's the guy on top of the pops and Jim will fix it. What? That's conspiracy theory. The BBC and the British establishment almost certainly are protecting him, even though there's probably many in there who've seen right through him. Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols was basically thrown off, banned from the BBC from saying when he was 19 years old on the radio that Jimmy Savile, I'd love to kill him. I've heard filthy things about him. And it wasn't, 35 years later that we now know what Jimmy Savile is. But conspiracy doesn't happen. Jimmy Savile was given the keys to Broadmoor Hospital, where he became very good friends with the Yorkshire Ripper, Sutcliffe, and they used to sit in the room all day laughing. And now people have said, including me, that he may have been involved or around. One of the women killed were found in his backyard in Soldiers' Fields in Leeds. But hey, it's just conspiracy theory. And this goes on and on and on, all through the place. And it's become to the point now where human beings think that politicians are as pure as the driven snow. And major corporations wouldn't sell bogus, badly tested pharmaceutical products to us because that's just conspiracy theory. So, you remember when we were growing up, thalidomide? Do you remember thalidomide? And the people with the little arms, with the fertility drug? Well, apparently that never happened because it was conspiracy theory. It never happened. Now, that's because I'm aware that I don't trust corporations for lots of reasons, but I also know what these corporations are like. And this is not a left wing, it's not a right wing, it's not a capitalism, it's not a socialism thing, it's purely natural law. It's like, who is in violation of natural law, who's being indecent, and who's telling me the truth? And we live in a world today where you will watch a TV show on RT or like a question panel show, and if somebody says, like a classic was about 15 years ago, they had the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Bilderbergs meeting in the RDS in Dublin. It was opened by Mary McAleese, and everybody, the Rockefellers and all of them were there. That week, even though their website was available online, the Irish Times said the Bilderberg Group was a conspiracy theory. But, we trust the media. They wouldn't lie to us, would they? They wouldn't lie to us. When a woman tried to bring up on a Pat Kenny show and said, not one person with the biggest meeting of the most powerful people in this world in the RDS last week, and not one member of the Irish media reported on it. And he goes, I haven't got time to talk about that. Go contact the RT Complaints Department for us not covering it. And yet people sat there and listened to all the nonsense that we've been subjected to since 2020, and believed every word of it. Believed that you would not be slaughtered by an invisible danger if you went into a pub and had a pint and a cheeseburger. The cheeseburger would save you from being killed. And I know people who took that and said, let's do it. And that was a great education for me, the greatest education ever, because I can remember when they announced the lockdown that night, they said, you can go for a 20-minute walk with one person from your family, from your household. And right in front of my place is a cycle and footpath that no one ever uses. And there they all were that evening. They took orders from Teleman I said, they're going to pull out some shit now on us. There's something really big going down here. And the propaganda, and it was because of all this interest I had over the year that led me to things like Bruno Bettelheim, Carl Jung, everything, that made me realize that the world that they're selling us is a load of rubbish. They're creating an illusion. They're creating their own Maya, their own pathological theatre, and people are believing it, even though the evidence in front of their own eyes is telling them this is not happening. Where are the bodies being pulled off the streets? So we were being told that doctors and nurses were dying on the job of exhaustion because bodies were piling up in the corridors of COVID victims, and yet we were getting TikTok dancing videos that had been carefully choreographed and rehearsed Because why? They were bored and the hospitals were empty. It existed purely in the fictional box on the TV in front of them. And I don't care what anyone says. You're wrong if you think there was one. The first numbers that came out told us there were 98% chance of survival. That's actually higher than the regular seasonal flu. And yet people were going, I better, don't come near me. I walk into work and there's a big fella there, the Mr. Hardman, he's the Mr., the Jack the Lad type, and he's like this beside me. And it started to dawn on me, we were getting the greatest education ever. Those of us with the eyes to see what was going on were looking at a piece of theatre. And all the books, I've written 2 books on psychopathy, by the way, all the things that I'd studied that I'd learned from pathological behaviour. See, how I started that was I was working in Wall Street, and I took an interest in serial killers. So I was reading profiles of Ted Bundy and all these, Moira Hindley and Ian Brady, and I'd be like, oh, here's the traits of the serial killer. That's him, my senior manager. He just doesn't kill people. He just doesn't kill them. But he has all the same pathological traits as the DSM test, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, and Robert Hare's checklist. A genius, great man, by the way. All down the list of these markers for psychopathic behaviour. He's the same person. And then you learn, then reading his books, you discover things like there are neurochemical responses that these types have that betray that they're lying. One of them is called duper's delight. What happens is some kind of trigger goes off and sets off a chemical on this side of their brain and they smirk. Well, things are really bad. We won't be letting go on holiday this year. Nothing we can do about it. And you see them all the time. And another one's a liar's grimace where it's I have to be very careful who I name here, an upside down smile. Lots of them. And go back and look at the NEFID press releases. We've had so many cases today. Okay, yeah, right. What does that mean? Well, you're supposed to be literally terrified, stay at home, and wait further instructions while we watch Netflix while we give you money while we demolish your society in the background on behalf of the World Economic Forum to bring in our Great Reset. Oh, that's conspiracy theory. But they have a website called the Great Reset. What's conspiracy theory? It's not true. It's just staggering when you start to see through this thing. The Ireland and the world that you live in is nothing to do with what they put on the telly. It's nothing. It's not that. That's a show that they give to you, a Punch and Judy show. But the real world is off somewhere else. If we had 2020 to 2023, there would be bodies all over the streets. We would know at least. You remember what you were saying? You'd have to get big put the bodies in the freezer. And now here's Luke O'Neill with a song and a dance. And you're supposed to take that seriously? Honestly? An educated human being? We're supposed to be told this is the greatest disaster in the history of the human race. And now here's Luke O'Neill to sing Ring of Fire. In his white coat and his guitar. Inside a bubble. Here's the guard are dancing Jerusalem because you're locked down and you have no freedom, but they're going to rub it into your face if they do. Oh, isn't it fantastic that we had them dance Jerusalem while we were locked down prisoners who couldn't go anywhere? But didn't they look great dancing the Garda horses? And that meant we were really in danger. It's absolutely staggering when you think about it. And this is not the first time in history they pulled this stuff. But they just had the technology through social media to be able to do it on a global mass scale. So, we all know these people. Stay home, save lives. Badge on their Facebook page. Picture me. Stay home, save lives, right? Next one, wear your mask. And they're wearing a mask. And then suddenly, as if someone flicks a switch, there's a yellow and blue flag underneath this picture where they were last week was stay home, save lives. Now, a country they couldn't find on a map means it's over. Like that. And then you think to yourself, am I, did some cosmic being create this world to say, I'm going to mess with Thomas Sheridan's head? Because, like that film, what was that film with Jim Carrey where he was inside a false world? Yeah. Is it like, has that been done to me? But then I started making videos in the car in Sligo, and I was just having these questions, what the hell is going on? And suddenly my views went from 1,500 a day to 15,000 overnight. And all over the world I'm getting messages saying, I'm living on an alien planet. My family have just turned into the aliens from Doctor Who. You know, they're telling me, they're not telling me I can't come over for Christmas because I had a cough last week. And I might infect them all. And I'm like, but then we also saw the meanness, didn't we? We saw the sadomasochism, people who relished in it. Little Hitlers, little control freaks who were suddenly turned on by their ability to punish people who didn't live up to their standards. Maintain social distance. You saw, and you laugh at it now, but what did we learn from that period? It's now no longer a mystery how the Holocaust happened, because the same Muppets who were fanatically devoted to speeches were the same personality disorder types who would have been devoted to Himmler. And I say that without a slither of restraint. It was the same tactics that Himmler used. Control through fear, an invisible enemy. Spy on your neighbours. I mean, how do you rationalise people who are calling up the Garda and saying, you know, you won next door, or you won down at 23. I saw her coming back from Tesco's, and it looked like there was stuff in her bag that wasn't essentials. And then the Garda, I mean, I could imagine lots of Garda were like pissing themselves laughing during that time. And all these old biddies calling up, you know, sorry, I don't mean to be sexist, there was lots of weirdo type. In fact, one of the things we learned from the COVID thing is just how weak many men are. Many men who identify as being macho turned out to be some of the biggest, I won't say the word, a euphemism for a cat. But, you know, and this is what was going on. But it even got more sinister. Like, you'd have people on News Talk or on these radio stations. What do you think they should do with people who should put them in a concentration camp, and that'll sort them out? Do you know that's what they said about the Jews in 1936? How dare you say that to me? I'm a wonderful person. What about when the kids were at Galway? They got teenagers who were having their best years of their lives robbed from them by this need to lock us down over a flu that 99% of people survived if they got it. And then saying, send the army in and machine gun them. That'll send a message out to the rest of the country. And not said in jest, said seriously. And you look at their Facebook pages and they're people with families who have normal lives, and yet they're seriously demanding that the army go down and machine gun 50 teenagers at the Spanish Arch in Cork. It was the greatest education ever. And when I said earlier on this talk, I'm challenging if nothing else. But where was I? Yeah, so you had that situation where they said, like, shoot them, okay. Now, do you remember earlier on in the talk, this first part of the talk, where I'd mentioned that you face a crisis in your life, and that crisis in your life brings a clarity. You see yourself for what you really are. You see the people around you for what you really are. For instance, I remember years ago a woman I know, and a lovely person, her husband, he ran off with a young hottie. The usual story, you know, midlife crisis thing. He was about 50-something. She thought she was happily married. And he met some girl at the office. She was like 20-something and gone, right? And divorced really quickly, right? And I was watching, I knew this woman quite well. And she was obviously, the poor woman was devastated by this, you know. And her husband wasn't a bad guy either. It's just this unfortunate thing happened. And she was telling me that many of her friends, I call these people trauma vampires, they pretend to support you, but they're really loving rubbing your suffering into you, right? They're vampires, but they pretend to be, you poor thing, you, give me a hug. Oh, do you need any help? This kind of thing, right? She told me that her husband, as soon as divorce happened, like a few days later, her and the ex-husband and this little hottie he was with, ran off to the Bahamas and got instantly married on a kind of a dream boat, you know, kind of a dream exotic holiday wedding kind of thing, right? She said several of her friends sent her the photographs of the wedding party and a reception, including her putting the rings on her finger. And we're doing things saying, can you believe, look at this bastard, he's already doing this. And then she said, it dawned on me, they weren't doing this to support me. They were doing this to rub my suffering into me deeper, under the guise of friendship and support. And she goes, I've never been the same person ever since then, because I see everyone around me with a clarity. And people who can sometimes pretend to be the most helpful and supportive can often be the biggest monsters of them all if something goes wrong in your life. And at the same token, someone who can be a quiet character in the background you barely know, and something terrible happens in, and they come in and are a champion. They come in and really help you out. And that's happened to all of us. And she told me that her divorce and what happened afterwards was the greatest education ever. I always remember her saying that, because she now saw the world for what it really is. And that's what happened during the lockdown, and all this stuff started. The people calling up, squealing on their neighbours, wanting kids machine gunned, having their own children, not allowing them access on Christmas Day. It was the greatest education ever. And all of us, unless you were some kind of mindless zombie who fell for it, all of us who saw this wickedness for what it was, all of us, right? We got the greatest education ever, because we were knocked out of our dream and saw our neighbours, friends, families, and even ourselves for what we really were. People that, you know, you couldn't believe how they behaved. And things like I said, now we know how the Holocaust happened. It was done by ordinary people. It's like, I used to always wonder, like, what kind of person grassed out Anne Frank to the Gestapo, knowing that there was an innocent child and her parents in that house? What person grassed out Anne Frank to the Gestapo? Well, in 2020, we knew exactly who they were. Your next door neighbour, in many cases. I'm leaning like this because I'm comfortable. I'm not trying to look like lazy or cool or anything. Don't think that. I'm very comfortable here. I feel really good. It's a lovely place. So, I've traumatised you enough already. Where do we go now? Let's get back to mythology, okay? Mythology is not only a psychoanalytical tool that was used by our ancient ancestors to warn people of certain pathological conditions regarding the human state of existence and challenges you might face in your life. Mythology also, as Joseph Campbell says, myth is not fake history. Myth is true history. It's real history, conveyed in parables, stories legends, and so on, that are so good they will carry the information on from generation to generation. Because why? They're fantastic stories. Okay? Now, our ancestors were just as intelligent as we were. Don't have these Darwinists try to make out that people, when you go back in the past, that people were like monkeys or something, they were proto-humanoids. Like the beginning of that movie, 2001 Space Odyssey, the apes around, they weren't like that. They were as intelligent and intellectual as we were. What they didn't have was they hadn't developed the technology yet to do what we can do. But the intellect behind the same thing that gave us the microchip and the TV screen and everything else, that existed. That same intellect was in the past, but they could only work with what the tools and the ideas and the methodologies that were available to them at the time, right? So, not only did they use the mythology to warn people of pathological situations and individuals in their lives, they also used it to convey things that happened that were catastrophic events. Okay. Now, Napoleon said, and he's 100% correct, that history is the lie that the victors agree upon. You could look at history from the point of the side that lost the war and get a completely different story than what's in the current history books. History is written by the victors. And I think everyone would agree with that. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. It means we're only getting a very limited part of the story to make it look good for the people in charge now today. Okay? We have to be very cognitive of this in the post-period, because they're going to try and rewrite this history to make it sound like there really was bodies in the streets. People were begging for Nephit to save them, like people would have died if Luke O'Neill didn't have his guitar, and so on. They will re-engineer the actual what went on to write the books, and you'll have a generation. It only takes one generation to then believe it as the fact. Okay, and so I'm nobody. Okay, I don't have much of a following in this world, but I'm trying to create a living mythology that somehow, if I can create it on YouTube or in books or in writing, that people will know that there was a completely other side to it than what the UN and the World Health Organization wants the world to believe about what happened on the last 3 years. Now, in the past, mythology was used to explain things that they couldn't explain. So, for instance, an easy one, a classic one is astrology, right? They knew that the stars were in the sky and they were fixed and moved in certain positions, and they were at different times of the year. You would have different constellations in the sky, right? And then they realized the planets were on different orbits, and these planets were different. They didn't move with the stars. They moved in their own orbital trajectories. And this began the beginning of what we started to understand as the heliocentric worldview. Completely correct, absolutely. And this notion that people thought the Earth was flat until Columbus is absolute nonsense. People have known the Earth was a globe for thousands and thousands of years. In fact, the Greeks measured it about 3,300 years ago by putting two sticks in the ground, one in Alexandria, one in Cairo, and measuring the distance of the shadow at the same time each year. And from that, were able to calculate almost precisely the circumference of the Earth. They were out a little bit. Why? Because the Earth is slightly spheroid shaped. It bulges at the sides from gravity. Okay, that's how clever our ancestors were. They didn't have to get into a spaceship to measure the circumference of the Earth. They used trigonometry. That was 3,300 years ago. That's how clever people in the past were. You can go to Egypt and you can find holes drilled into stone that have obviously been done by a high-speed, high-powered rotary drill, and they know by the teeth marks on the inside how fast the drill was spinning. This is another part of my life, is going around ancient sites. And this was a real revelation to me regarding how history is a load of nonsense, particularly the ancient world. You have places like the Temple of Baalbek in the Lebanon, where you have 1,000-ton lintel lifted 30 feet off the ground and slotted into a hole that was cut into the side of the Temple of Jupiter. Lupitor, and they say the Romans did it, and they did it with cranes made of planks, ropes. It's just insane. And yet academics believe this because there's no other explanation they can come out with. Can I explain how that was done? No, I can't. There's ideas and theories I have, but I can't explain it. But I know enough to know that it's an open-ended mystery that hasn't been solved. It has not been solved. So the ancient world contains things that are mysterious, and we don't know what happened. But we do know from mythology that certain things have happened around the world. There definitely still does seem to have been a flood similar to the one that was described in the Bible. In fact, every mythology, including the Irish one, that was an argument I had with some Egypt a few years ago. There's no Irish flood myth. No, the Tuatha De Danann came here in the storm from the destroyed homelands across the sea. That's our flood myth. And it's all over the world. There was an American scientist called Immanuel Velikovsky who wrote an incredible book back in the day called World is Motion. And he showed how the orbital trajectory of Venus probably changed. And it was all over mythology. People would describe the brightest star in the sky, kept really, really bright. It came very close to the Earth, and it moved over into the position it's in now as the morning and evening star. So something had happened to Venus, which used to be in an orbit between Earth and Mars, probably hit by a comet or something, and this comet had knocked Venus out of its orbit, out of its trajectoral orbit, spun it, and it ended up in an orbital place where it is now between Earth and Mercury as the morning and evening star. In fact, even in classical times, there was a lot of people it took a long time to convince people that Venus was the morning and evening planet, because they were not sure, and it took certain calculations later on for them to figure out it's actually the same planet. It was just this is how genius these people were, you know. They had complex calculations and ways of doing things. They had tremendous observational skills. And we now live in an age where I'm starting to see more and more people who think the Earth is flat. And I'm like, and the ignorance is staggering. It's like, I don't know for sure it's round, I can't tell. You've never seen a ship go over the horizon. You've never seen what you call chemtrails curving around, and when you're standing on the coast, that's following the inside of the Earth's atmosphere. God Almighty, it's one of the things that humans discovered. Thousands of years they've known it. Even the ancient Irish talked about these people who lived below the equator in some of the old documents. They knew. The Vikings, when they would sail to Iceland, knew how to navigate because the distance that the Faroe Islands was above the ocean allowed them to calculate how far north they were in terms of latitude. The easiest one, I don't ever think there probably was a period of history where people thought the Earth was flat until about 100 years ago, when these religious nuts started to think the Bible was telling the truth, literal truth. So that's how clever people were for a long time, for a very long time. They had ancient technology we can't explain. There are these stone balls that were found all over Scotland, these spears, that have incredible intricate cuts into them that could only have been done, according to the experts, in the archaeological experts, with someone using something like a high-powered Dremel tool. The famous head that was found in Nowth, it's called an axe head. It was found in Nowth in County Meath. It's actually a type of quartz from Orkney, of all places, that was found. And even at the University of Galway, they actually said the only way this could have been made, and it's 5,500 years old minimum, was with a high-powered rotary tool. It could not be made any other way. And that's okay. That doesn't mean it was. Maybe they used sound or something else. I don't know. But that's, the fact that they acknowledge that is enough to tell you that we weren't dealing with fellas who were, like Homer Simpsons in a loincloth. In fact, if you go to the Temple of Gigantea in Malta and Gozo, actually, and next door they have a museum, and they show how this incredible structure was built 6,000 years ago, and they literally have fellas looking like Homer Simpson in loincloths, going, ooh, and the one guy's hammering away, and a hammer hits on his head, and he's going, ooh. We're talking about people who were scientists who could calculate, in whatever methodology they could, maybe write it out on a piece of sand or something, or just had it innately. You just like there's certain carpenters who can build the most incredible piece of furniture out you can drawing it. These people had their own ways of doing things, but they may have had high technology. They may have had the machinery that we have today, because literally everything will be destroyed except stone. Stone is all we have of these things. Then they say, well, did they have anything else? Well, if you put a computer or an old TV, next time, here's an experiment. If you live here in the west of Ireland, put a TV or a washing machine in your backyard. Within a year or two, it'll be gone. It'll be an orange stain on the ground. Maybe some of the wires are there, but you'll be amazed how quickly things rot and decay. This nonsense we were told in school that plastics take 10,000 years to deteriorate, they deteriorate in no time. The classic thing of the Coca-Cola bottle paradox. There have been millions and billions of Coca-Cola glass bottles that were produced back in the day. Have you ever found one when digging the garden? Go to any beach around the country, do they ever find them? No. They decay, they get crushed, they turn to silica in no time. Within a matter of years, they become dust, they become sand again. So this whole thing that if they had ancient machines, we'd have them. It's nonsense. But what we do have is the evidence of their usage, such as those stones that have been drilled in ancient Egypt. Now, and it goes on all over the world. I was not too long ago in Sri Lanka, and I wanted to see this megalithic site on top of a mountain in the jungle. And they gave me a Sherpa. And I was like, what? I had the tour guide and a Sherpa. And I was like, I felt like David Niven or something in a movie, And I'm saying, what are you, little small Tamil fellow about the height? What are you doing here? I go, I'm a Sherpa. I help you. But all I've got is a camera. All I've got is a camera. And he was like, no, I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you. And so, okay. And I'm walking up the mountain. And it's starting to get really hot in the jungle at this point. And I'm starting to go, like this. And then all of a sudden I feel, boom, on my arse like that. And the little Sherpa fella's behind me like this, holding my arse cheeks, bum cheeks, and pushing me from behind like this. And I look around and there he is. And I say, what are you doing? He says, this is what I'm paid to do. I help people up the mountain if they get tired. And I felt kind of bad about it, because you think, like, am I being a bit in the class? Is the class system here in operation or something? Am I the rich Westerner taking advantage of this little Tamil guy? And the archaeologist goes, don't worry about it. Do what he does. So he's pushing me up the mountain, right? And shall we say, the proximity of his thumbs was starting to get too close together for comfort. And I'm like, if I'm honest about it, I was more afraid that I'd actually enjoy it. But he's pushing me up the mountain, so I was afraid that we'd end up at the top of the cliff. By the time we came down, we were engaged. And I said, get off me! Get off me! Like that, I said like that. And he jumped back like that. And I said, oh shit, I don't mean any offence, but I didn't like the way you were pushing on my arse then. And the archaeologists go, why did you do that, son? You shouldn't have done that. That's you've hurt them. So I threw him €100 when I got down to not so feel bad. But it showed you like that, here I was like not ready for this experience. But anyway, get to the top of the mountain. The Sherpa's happy because I gave him €100. He's leaving me alone. And my manhood is still intact. And they showed me this incredible site that had stonework that was cut like that. Like you couldn't get a razor between it. On the top of a mountain in the jungle. You know? And I'm like, it's just like you see the stuff in Peru all the time, this interlocking, interlaced stonework. And this is the first time I've seen this stuff close up, but it does exist in Ireland in one place I'll tell you about in a minute. And I'm looking at this stuff, and I'm examining it, and I'm saying, this is machined. This is only a machine thing could do this. And I say to the archaeologist, how was it done? And he said, oh, they were excellent stonemasons. And I said, oh, I totally agree with you there, no doubt about that. And I said, was this before or after the Buddhist period? Because the things they say here about the Christians, they say the same in the East about the Buddhists. And he said, no, this is before the Buddhists. So who made it? Either devil worshippers. So it's the same as here, that because they weren't Buddhists, they were somehow not, they were bad people, even though they made these stoneworks. And that has been used a lot in the story of ancient antiquities, and even here in Ireland. Now, one of the things we have, like I said, in mythology, is that there's the theory I told you about Immanuel Velikovsky and catastrophism. There's these catastrophic events. These ancient people experienced them, but they didn't have the scientific language to write them down in what they had. Oh, the tectonic plate shifted, and it lifted up the sea level, and then they had continental drift and all this stuff. They just said, the sea lifted, it came in land and flooded the land, something like that. But they wrote it in parable, and they would often describe it as a monster. Now, in this northern half of Ireland, we have this thing called the Black Pig, and all from Sligo, Easky, all the way across to Dundalk, there's all places called, on Muckadove, the Black Pig this, the Black Pig Valley, the Black Pig that, and they go across just that part of Ireland. And they're gorgeous, and they look like they've been carved out. The story is, in the mythology, that a black pig came out of the sea in Easky, in County Sligo, in the Atlantic, went right across the country, carving out and using its snout to dig out the ground, right? Got to the Irish Sea and went into the Irish Sea. What was left in its wake was landscape that was devastated and poisoned. You couldn't grow anything in it because it had been felled by the black pig. What were they describing? A tsunami. They didn't have the language of tsunami. They didn't have the scientific verbiage to actually say this, but they put it into metaphor, allegory, and parable, and they called it the black pig. And these stories appear all through history, where you might have like a comet came down that's referred to as a dragon, this kind of thing. Or the days when the sun shone and we all had to go indoors, and they would call it the sun dragon or the sunbird or the firebird. And these would be solar flares and stuff like that. So there definitely has seemed to be a catastrophe that's happened on this earth. It's shown in all cultures. And it ties in sweetly, interestingly enough, with Plato's description and timeline for Atlantis. Beautifully, actually. 12,000 years ago. It was 9,000 years in Plato's time, right? So, roughly 12,000 years. And all over the world, there are places that seem to have been damaged around that time. There are, particularly in the Atlantic, there are boulders that have been washed in sea huge distances. There's the thing called the Bimini Road, which is off the Bahamas, which is a man-made structure under the Bahamas, which, funny enough, Edgar Cayce said would be discovered while he was in one of his trances. And they found it. And you have all the oldest megaliths in Europe are actually in the western coast. They're not, like if we were to go by the out of Egypt thing, out of Babylon thing, right? So you should have the oldest megaliths, the oldest sites are in Mesopotamia, Sumeria. So it would stand to reason that the ones in the west coast of Ireland, the youngest ones, because they came later, they're actually the oldest ones. Now, carbon dating, it's an iffy thing, but sometimes you get a perfect sample. And how carbon dating is they pick up a stone from, say, a megalith, and they take the soil from under the megalith, and then they carbon date it, and by the deterioration of carbon-14 atoms, they can tell how old the thing actually is. It's a very unreliable thing, and say, when they lifted up the stones of Stonehenge, because all kinds of things from worms to bunny rabbits will move the soil under those things over the centuries. So it's not always an accurate one. But it was one time in Sligo, at Carrowmore on Tomb 50, they call it Tomb 51. The one you can actually go into, you know, the one that has a dolmen inside it, that Julian Cope featured on the TV show. They lift in what they call a dolmen, it's actually the central chamber. They lifted the capstone off and they found a piece of soil that was trapped there for 5,500 years, they thought. And they said, that's perfectly uncontaminated, it's ideal. It's been there from the day that that capstone was lowered on top. Right? That's a bulletproof piece of carbon dating, right? The Swedish team that did it came back with a date of 12,000 BC. That's nearly 3 times older than the official story. They announced it in all the local papers. It made the national news that there's been a megalith found in Ireland that shows that people were building stone monuments in this country 12,000 BC. We have a bulletproof piece of carbon dating. And the Irish archaeologists put a press release without seeing the data and going, it's a lie, go back and get the correct date. Gatekeepers. They were gatekeeping the correct date. But that proved to me that they were telling the truth. Now, this is happening all over the world. You know, there was a belief that there was nothing older than 3500 BC. You had the discovery of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, on the Turkey-Iraq border, and new monuments that are pushed, as Graham Hancock say, things just keep getting older, pushing it further and further back. And then you have to wonder, well, what is history? You know, how tight is the historical timeline? And you discover there's all kinds of anomalies. It's the Napoleonic thing. Not only do Napoleon say that history is a lie that people agree on, but timelines are as well. You know, the messing of the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar to try and fix the perfectly intact 13-month pagan calendar, the lunar calendar, to try and compensate this kind of thing. There seems to be periods of history, even in the Middle Ages, that are not there. They're missing. And there's only 2 or 3 books that say they happened, and funny enough, they're all locked away in the Vatican Library, and you can't have access to them. And this kind of thing. So, in Ireland, we're told that we were backward savages, pagans, who had no culture. We lived in mud huts. And then this Welsh guy came along, the patrician, that's what St. Patrick means, he was a Roman patrician, and suddenly all these things start popping up, Clonmacnoise, Kells, everywhere, they all start popping up. These round towers, these incredible structures start popping up overnight. And it was the Christians who built them, because the pagans were all just going like that kind of thing, right? They were devil worshippers, like the guy in Sri Lanka said at the pre-Buddhist things. So, in 1700, there in 1790-something, our friends in the Royal Irish Academy, the biggest gatekeepers of them all, ironically, the Royal Irish Academy is based in London, and they set out a competition to find the date of the Round Towers. Nobody knew how old the Round Towers were in Ireland. Nobody knew. And there was just, who built them, haven't got a clue. And people before then were quite open to the fact that they were built by an ancient culture. But have you ever stood underneath some of these round towers? They're incredibly well engineered. You could fire a laser up the side and it wouldn't even touch one stone. The one in Kilmacdonough, these would have been skyscrapers in the ancient world, has that interlock stone working at the bottom I was talking about, and so does a building next door, and on top of that you have Christian rubble to do the Romanesque architecture. But they had a competition, and there was 2 people involved, and one of them was a guy called Henry O'Neill. And Henry O'Neill put forth his book was published called The Round Tower of Ireland. Now, it's very flowery. It's a lot of nonsense in it as well, because it was the time that it was. But he said they were built by an ancient race before the Christians came along that probably came from what we call Atlantis. And they brought this technology with them. Now, I don't know about that part, but I'm bang on that I agree with them that they were much older than the Middle Ages, like they tell us they were. You know why they tell you they're from the Middle Ages? Do you know, those of us of a certain age, remember growing up in school with those Folens copybooks? And on the cover was, he was an escaped Nazi, by the way, the Folens copybooks, and on the cover was the round tower with the pointed thing. That pointed thing was put there in the Middle Ages to make it look like a church tower. Before that, they were either flat or had like a kind of a dome, like a clock on, like a beehive hut, extended. Now, this competition decided they were Christian in origin. Why? Because they were built where they were most of them were at Christian centres. But that's putting the cart before the horse, because if you look at many Christian churches, particularly in England, they're built on the site of old pagan sites. And there's quite a few of them in Ireland as well. And it makes sense. The Christians came along. They needed a centre of worship. The pagans were using a particular spot. And they said, well, let's keep them company. Usually a holy well is nearby. That's usually always the giveaway. There's a holy well nearby. And then you know it's a pagan's, what they call a holy well. They were druid wells. And then they built, it makes perfect sense. So, like, if you have a supermarket like Dunnes Stores goes out of business and Tesco takes the building over and turns it into a Tesco, because why? It was already a supermarket and we just capture what we already had. So the Christians did the same with the pagan sites. They just moved in and slowly changed them at the Christian sites. The round towers were already there. There's loads of reasons for this. There's not one mention, there's not one ecclesiastical document in Ireland that talks about the building of the round towers. All the buildings in the infrastructure, but not the round towers. There is a document that talks about the towers were badly damaged in 440-something by an earthquake and needed repairing. This was like literally a few years after St. Patrick's alleged arrival. You're trying to tell me that within a few years of St. Patrick coming over here, that they actually had all these towers built in no time? No, they already existed. Another thing they did was that it's amazing how they make the ancient Irish look so stupid. They said, well, they're built with Roman mortar and cement, and that's true. They use a very thin layer of what we call Roman cement mortar, which is made from quicklime, the blood of a cow as a plasticizer, and a bit of straw and a bit of muck out of the ground or sand. And that's how they made that was Roman mortar. And the Irish used them to build the round towers. So they said, well, Ireland had no contact with the outside world until after St. Patrick. We were completely isolated. So they were actually trying to make out that no way did paddies go over to England and see the Romans building buildings and go, oh, that's a great idea, I'll borrow that. They literally thought that the paddies couldn't build boats to get to England. They were too stupid. So they had to wait till the Romans came here under the Catholic Church and teach us how to make cement. Now, one thing you know about the paddies, we go everywhere because we're island people and by nature we want to travel. On top of that, you have documents by Roman historians like Tacitus saying Ireland is well known to the Romans and their ports and trading vessels are well known to our merchant navies. So the Irish had a complex marine but culture long before the Christians came along, trading back and forth with England and Britain and France. This is how Romanised Celtic tribes like the Menappi came to County Wexford and the Brittonic tribes. They came across the sea and they settled in Ireland. That's why there's been enormous amounts of Roman coins found in Ireland. This nonsense that the Romans never came to Ireland is not true. They may not have invaded, but they were definitely here as a kind of a trading force. And we know about Drummanagh up in North County Dublin. That's absolutely a Roman settlement. And that'll be all blown out of the water in terms of being made public in the next few years because Fingal County Council bought it. And now the archaeologists are going in, they're finding Roman pottery and everything constantly in this place. And we're still told the Romans were never here. So, it's nonsense. And the Paddies couldn't have got to England to learn how to make mortar. They couldn't, they were standing on the edge of the beach and they didn't know how to do anything until this ship came along with this Welsh guy called Patrician, and he landed on Ireland, and suddenly they were able to make cement. Now, you go to the National Museum of Ireland and you see they hate the fact that anything ancient from Ireland looks cool or looks amazing. You go to the National Museum of Ireland, and I have in my book there, The Druid Code, an actual illustration of a photograph I took in the National Museum. They have this incredible Bronze Age Irish gold work. You have to see it. If you haven't been to the National Museum on Merrion Square, they have Bronze Age Irish gold work that is astounding. The intricacy, the artistry, the skill. And next to it, they have the picture of the guy who made it. And he looks like Homer Simpson with a loincloth. So he could produce tremendous amounts of tremendous engineering and gold work and metalsmith, but he couldn't make himself clothes. This is to force the idea from Darwinism that people are stupid. The further you go back, the more stupid they are. It's not true at all. And so the Round Towers of Ireland, I believe, were built probably in the late BC era, maybe 50 to 100 BC, used by Irish engineers who went to England and they were already building the beehive huts, but they knew they could only get them a certain height without cement. And they discovered, the round towers are all the same dimensions. Did you know that? They're different heights, but the interior dimensions are all the same. As if a team of builders was going around the country constructing them to a specific plan. And this is where it gets real interesting. Down in Skellig Michael, the clock-ons, the beehive huts, they're built to the exact same dimensions as the round towers, identically. They discovered, this is how genius our ancient ancestors are, they discovered something with those clock-ons that had an effect or produced something. And like a radio antenna, when you pulled it out of an old FM radio, the higher or lower you went up, the effect could be tuned into. They wanted to build bigger clock-ons, right? But they didn't have Roman cement to make them over 30, 40, 100 feet. So they went over to England, and it was Britain then. England didn't exist, but they went over to Britain, and they learned about Roman cement, and came back to Ireland, and they improved. They were able to start building the round towers, moving the clock-ons up. Now, why would they do that? Now, we were told in school, the stupid thing, that when the monks were being attacked, they ran in there with their valuables and manuscripts, and then the Vikings would escape the Vikings. All the Vikings would have to do would be light a fire at the door and smoke them all to death, and then wait for them to all start falling down dead, and then go in and take the manuscripts and the chalices and stuff. They think if you lit a fire, they would go up like a flu. So that wasn't what they were for. That was a made-up story. There was an American engineer, this is a fantastic story, called Philip S. Callahan. He was involved with the United States Army, and he was based in Omagh or somewhere in that part of Northern Ireland, Enniskillen area. And his job was to develop a new radio system to be used for the D-Day landings, that the Germans couldn't hack or infiltrate or break the code. This guy was a top-level scientist in the military. When D-Day happened, he had nothing to do. But while he was in Ireland, him and the other engineers were going around visiting stone circles and other things. And he took a particular interest in the round towers and brought all this incredible high-end measuring and detection equipment to the round towers. And he wrote a book that's called The Magnetic Life of Agriculture. And it's probably one of the greatest books ever written. But what he discovered was, and any Irish farmer who lives near a round tower will tell you this, if you have a round tower in a field and you bring the cows and sheep in, they will graze at the bottom of the round tower because the grass grows better. And our ancient ancestors had discovered that these clock-ons had an effect on the landscape. They made it healthier. They made the grass yield better. They made animals were less likely to get sick. So they decided to build them as big antennas. And they pulled in a thing called diamagnetic energy, which is not the same thing as electromagnetic energy. There's paramagnetic energy and diamagnetic energy. And diamagnetic energy was being pulled in by these round towers and channeled into the soil below to increase the health of the land and possibly things like keep vegetables longer. Remember that book that came out back in the day, The Pyramid Code, where someone discovered that if you built the shape of a pyramid and you put fruit inside it, it stayed fresh for much, much longer than when it was outside the pyramid? Same idea. It became a kind of a preserving, conditioning thing. And our ancestors were able to have higher yields of food, better livestock, using the round towers. And this is why 100 of them are built around the country. And they're all different heights, because they would get to a certain height and notice a change in the growth of grass. It's tall enough. So that's why you'd have ones that are like you'd have the one in Kilmacdonough in Clare's colossal, the one in Blessington, not Blessington, Glendalough is colossal. And then there's other ones that are short, because they'd reached a height where whatever the atmosphere and the soil, that's tall enough, lads. We got conditioned soil. And in other places like Devonish Island, they had to build them bigger. Now, this shows a level of technology they had different technology back then, but they still had high technology, but they just worked with things. So you have the situation where Christianity arrives in Ireland and starts rewriting our history. This is one of the reasons why you have to be careful with Irish mythology. Someone asked me there earlier on about Scotia, the supposed Egyptian queen who's buried in a mound in Kerry. It's nonsense. Loads of reasons why it's nonsense. First of all, the document refers to an Egyptian queen who came to Ireland in the Middle Ages, right? And she married an Irish prince. She wasn't a pharaonic. She wasn't Nefertiti. And these people called British Israelites went around trying to find ways to connect Ireland with the Holy Land or the Middle East. And they did terrible damage to Tara trying to find the Ark of the Covenant. They destroyed it. It wasn't until Douglas Hyde put a revolver to one of their heads to stop it. They were like fundamentalist Protestants who believed that the Bible was absolute and it happened in this part of the world. It was completely crazy, and based on nothing other than they wanted to start a new religion. And they were all these rich people with lots of money. It was like Scientology of its day. Think of it that way. And so they went down to Kerry. They found a 5,000-year-old megalith, and they said to the farmer, "Is that Scotia's grave?" And he went, "Sure it is." You know what Irish farmers are like. Then he goes down the pub that night and he goes, "You want to hear this? A bunch of these English lads came along and they said, 'Is that the grave of an Egyptian princess? There got to be a few bob in it for me,' so I said it was." And suddenly you have a mythology that's not true. You have to understand that history is human. History is human. But there's no proof of any of that stuff. Now there have been documents found in Ireland that were Egyptian in nature, but they were brought here years later, and they weren't written here. They were during the so-called Dark Ages, which really it wasn't, because paganism came back to Europe. A lot of Christian documents were brought to archives and libraries, or brought to places like Clonmacnoise to keep them safe. The whole thing, like how the Irish saved civilization. They didn't really. They saved the Synoptic Gospels. Really, that's what they saved. They saved Christianity. But they didn't really. It was brought here because it was the furthest from Europe. They thought it would be the safest place to bring it. So that's why they found... So it would be some fellas bringing documents from Europe across the bogs of Allen, and the bandits got them, and they robbed them, and they saw these ancient Egyptian documents and threw them in the bog. That's how they ended up there. So it was part of this. Ireland was actually an amazing place in those times. If you look at Clonmacnoise, you can see that, It was a universe. It was like Hogwarts or something, But there's also a character called the Goban Sayer and the Gobanu. One is the Christian Smith and one is the pagan Smith, the Smith god. So they even took names and changed them like that way. And this was and the Gobanu, Goban Sayer, was the one who went around Ireland following St. Patrick, building all these great monasteries. including the round towers. He wasn't. He was the pagan god, and you just gave him a new name and said he did this. Yeah, the Romans, the Catholic Church built all the beautiful ecclesiastic monuments that we have at like Cashel and stuff like that. They didn't build the round towers. They did not build them. They were there already. You can even see them in photographs. They have different stone and everything. And the stone is obviously weathered much more than ones that haven't been blasted with a sandblaster. So that just shows you how you grow up with a history that may not be true. In fact, there's a lot, when you start looking into this stuff, you start thinking, well, what is true? And you can only really verify back a few hundred years because we have documents from all over the world. But once you start getting to the Middle Ages, it gets very iffy. Very iffy indeed. Charlemagne has very few documents to actually to prove that he existed. This is the great leader of Europe. And he was the one that began the European Union when you think about it, because he consolidated, he was the Holy Roman Empire and all this stuff, That was the beginning of all that phase. But there's truth in it too. And one of them I want to talk about, I don't know how much longer we have, so tell me. I'll finish on something. The Arthurian legends. You've all heard the Arthurian legends, the Grail mysteries, Lancelot, Guinevere, Merlin. Some of that stuff is based on myth, some of that stuff is based on fairy tale, and some of that stuff is based on real history that's been rewritten. For instance, Merlin was a real character, a real historic character. He was a Brittonic prince from Wales, and Wales was a much bigger country then than it is now, who took part in a battle up at the borders near Scotland, and he saw all his relatives and friends killed, and he suffered from a nervous breakdown. It's the first recorded case in history of post-traumatic stress disorder, what they call shell shock. And he went to live in the deep woods of the Scottish borders up there, in that part of the world, and he reverted into a druid. He became like a Gandalf kind of character, and because he had this kind of shamanic, and I hate to use that word because shamanism is thrown away around too much, but this kind of shamanic thing happened to him, where he went back and became a druid, and suddenly had a reputation of being this great man of mystery, and wisdom. He had all this wisdom, to the point where not English kings, but foreign kings would come to see him and ask for counsel. And so he really existed, and he was called the son of the devil, and the servant of God. Meaning he was the son of the devil, back to pagans again, Sri Lanka, remember devil worshippers built it. He was the son of God, so a servant of God. So that way they kind of excused him. But he was a real character, very similar to how he's been portrayed in mythology. He was a Gandalf-type character. And his name was Mithrin. That was his real Welsh name, because Merlin translates in Anglo-Saxon to poo, excrement. So that's why they changed his name. His real name is Mithrin. Now, he was an actual historical figure, so we know Merlin really existed. Now, what it gets really interested in is the Grail mysteries. Geoffrey of Mormon talked about the 4 Grail treasures, which were sought by, one of them would be a Holy Grail, the chalice, other one was a spear, and then a few other things that were these were the 4 Grail treasures. They are identical to the 4 treasures brought to Ireland by the Tuatha De Danann from the destroyed cities across the sea. And the Dagda's cauldron became the Holy Grail. So, it's just amazing how these things, and what did they come from? A destroyed homeland across the sea. Atlantis. So we're getting history, mythology, catastrophism, actual history, pseudo-history, and fairy tales in these same stories, which shows you how you can approach them from different ways. And that's why these stories endure and why they continue to last. And I know this has been a very roundabout talk, but, welcome to my brain. But what does that tell us? Let's find an answer in all this. What's the point in knowing all this stuff? Well, I told you earlier on that people I know who have that kind of Joseph Campbell way of thinking instantly recognized something wasn't right during the lockdowns. They're not telling us the full. There's a rules going on here, because they saw the archetypes of the baddies and people like Nephit. They're liars. They saw them in the liars in the media. They're liars. They're grim and worn. RTE should have been called Radio Grim and Worn Tongue. You know, the BBC lies every night, terrorising people, case numbers. I get lots of messages from people, and you think it's a joke now when you think about. I've got numerous messages from people, and they say, "Thomas, thanks for all your vlogs during the lockdowns. They really helped me. Pity they couldn't help my brother who didn't watch them." And so what happened? He killed himself. Do you know how many people commit suicide during the lockdowns? And they marked them off as COVID victims. Are you telling me that you still think the Irish government are not evil? That the HSE are not evil? That RTE are not evil? If you were someone like, what was her name, in her garden shed, pretending to be socially isolating, terrorising the nation every night, this is the same excuse. You know, if you read about the Holocaust, the SS would go to work, they would organise the killing of children, come home and say, "Yeah, it's just my job. It's just business. I'm just following orders." And yet you have young men who had their businesses destroyed or their social lives destroyed. How many teenagers killed themselves? Or how many people who loved their jobs? They might have been just a waitress in a bar, but that was their social life as well. They met people, and they're told to sit at home, collect €350 and watch Netflix. And it's never talked about, but I can tell you, on anecdotal evidence, in God knows what the numbers are worldwide, but in Ireland it's pretty high. It's pretty high, the suicide numbers. And why did it happen? Because of liars, people that you call, politicians you call by your first name, that you think you're their mates. They don't care about you. They're all lobbying for jobs in Europe, and when their gig is up here, they're all... With the exception, I quite like your man Healy Ray. I do like him, because he's actually working for his constituency. He's not working for Europe, to get a job in Europe down the road. No matter what you want to say about him, I trust someone like him rather than somebody who's like scaring the shite out of us so he can get a job in the EU later on. You know, I'd rather deal with that. I'd rather deal with an honest type like him than a smooth-talking, slick politician who is a big liar, is a real liar, you know, that kind of a thing, and he's only using you. Like, I remember when I first moved to Sligo, they closed down the cancer unit at Sligo General, and a local politician up there, a TD, was photographed holding the hands of women who had hats on them when they had no hair from the chemo, and he was going, "I will do everything I can in my power to make sure that the oncology ward at Sligo is kept fully operational and not moved to Galway." Well, at the same time he was doing this, Mr. Slick Willie, politician, was signing the documents to send the oncology ward to Galway, while he was looking women on chemotherapy in the eyes and saying that. That's what you're dealing with. I'd rather have someone who's like a bit of a chancer or a Charlie Hottie than someone like that, because I know what I'm dealing with. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. And those of us recognise the monsters in these people. We saw them. There was you're a liar. Don't tell me. You're being turned on. You're the power trip. See, they had a huge power trip. Who was that guy? He wanted to keep the lockdown going forever, and so did Sinn Féin and Mary Lou MacDonald. They wanted the lockdown to go. They were, and then there was all that they didn't care. They were in power. They were like, you know, I'm in power. I'm the king of lockdown. I'm going to keep people locked down forever. And that's how they literally felt. And I was telling Una and Martina and Lydia a story they did last night. One of the most shameful experiences, and to show you how the propaganda worked in different countries, I had human trafficked myself over to England during the lockdown to do a talk there, and I smuggled myself across the border to get to do a talk in England. On the way back, I was getting a bus from Belfast to Dublin. Ulster bus from Great Victoria Street bus station in Belfast. Now, they were still locked down, full masks, social distancing, the works down south. But up north, it was much more relaxed, okay? So I get on the bus, and I'm sitting in front of two women, both middle-aged, and every person that got onto the masked up to the hill, the one that you know that black Donald Duck mask, remember that one? Kind of came out like that. And all you saw were the eyeballs, those two terrorised eyeballs above them, and and every person, there's all people getting on the bus with no mask. Every one of them. And there was a bunch of lads who were obviously going on holiday, and they were like middle-aged men, and they were going down to Dublin Airport to catch a flight. And they get on the bus and hey, like the kind of thing, all good, no one has a mask, like this. They go, one of them runs up like this to the bus driver. Runs back to the seat, right? And the bus driver hear him saying, "I'm sorry, ladies, we don't have the same laws on Ulster bus in the north that you do on Bus Ireland. I can't force someone to wear a mask." And then they were like, "It's disgraceful, it's disgraceful." And I was like so ashamed because they had Dublin accents like me, and I was like, that's what my city's producing now. And so the bus driver makes an announcement, and you could see he was cringing, he didn't want to do it. And he goes, down south people are there's still mask mandates for southern passengers, so those of you not wearing masks, if you have a mask, wear it. Just be cordial to people. Now, the funny thing was that they were the ones who were not being cordial, the two. And the lads who were going to Dublin Airport just burst out laughing at the back and clapping and everything. And the two women scurried to the front of the bus beside the driver and spent the whole trip like this. Like that. What was the difference between those two women and the people from Northern Ireland with no masks, not living in terror? One thing, RTE. That was the only difference. They were not watching RTE up there, and they had not been literally mind-controlled. Literally mind-controlled into a state of Pavlovian terror. When I got down, Belfast was hopping. All the places were open. I didn't have to sign a fake name on the red. You had to know that thing. You had to sign your fake name to get there. You have to write down, and I got tired of writing Solomon Mendelbaum, but that they didn't have that up north. All the restaurants and cafes were open. Everything was fine. I got down to Dublin and I nearly died. It was like a post-apocalyptic scene. The city centre was empty. The atmosphere was horrific. And the only difference between why Dublin was hell on earth, zombie land, dead, and Belfast, everything was open, was RTE. Nothing else. And if you think there's no such thing as mind control and propaganda, we had real-time and real-life data in front of us that they terrorised people in this country. How many marriages broke up because they were forced to lock into the house? I mean, there's lots of people who are happily married as long as they can go to work and, that kind of thing. Oh, yeah, or they're a couple. Oh, we get on great. Once I have my job and we can have a few hours apart every day. And these good people were, they probably were probably okay. They started to turn on one another. Now, I know there were bad marriages that probably should have broke up as well. And that was really a good part of it, actually, because it forced them to face the shadow. And that's where I'm going to end this, okay? Another few more minutes, because I know they can't stay here. Within Jungian psychology, and this is why I can't stand the New Age. Everything is like love and light, and everything is all sugar pups and lollipops. Life isn't like that. Within Jungian psychology is something called the shadow. It is one of the greatest psychological things ever devised by people. The shadow represents the part of your psyche where your primal fears exist, or where there's things about you that you need to change, but you're denying it. You won't deal with it. So say if you have an issue, you had a relationship that went bad in the past, And you know these fellas that go, I'm finished with women, all women are slags, and these women who have a bad experience with a man, men are no good, they're all rubbish. Well, that's the shadow not facing that maybe I played a part in the end of that relationship. You know, or if he was an abuser, why did I marry him in the first place? What's wrong with me that I married him? You know, the shadow is asking questions of yourself that you're not supposed to ask. Well, your society tells you that, they'll bury them. Shame. Our collective shadow in Ireland is what will the neighbours think. Did you know that? Our collective shadow in Irish society is what will the neighbours think. And that extends to the government, because, do you remember the hate speech law was going right through, and they were very happy until Elon Musk said, hey, what's going on here? Do you see what's going on in Ireland? They want to bring in a hate speech law that will basically arrest you for nothing. Yeah. And when that was, then they suddenly say, we're putting the hate speech law on hold. Why? What would the neighbours think? Elon Musk was the neighbour of the nation. You understand? Like, and Irish people's shadow was like, what will the neighbours think? And great crimes have been committed. Daughters have been put in Magdalene laundries, you name it. Families have been destroyed by emigration because what will the neighbours think? This kind of thing. Irish people who should have fulfilled their potential on this island, and it may have meant starting out washing dishes, didn't do it, but did it in England or America because the neighbours weren't there to think, what will the neighbours think? That's our collective shadow. And we're desperately sad as a people because of it. Like, I actually respect countries where a place I go to, like Corsica, and the guy says to me, what the hell are you doing in my country? Where the Irish will go to a foreigner and say, a tourist, and say, sure, aren't we great? Aren't we wonderful? I'm waiting to hear back, you are. You know, like children. There's a childlike thing in the Irish culture that's like us. When you transcend that and you don't give a shit what the outsider neighbour thinks, your life will grow. Your life will... The one who lives on the street that lives in fear of what will the neighbours think. Oh, you know, there's something not right there. Our oldest son is 20, and then the next kid down is 7. What happened that there's a big gap there, you know? And then people will go, the neighbours might be taught, they might be, you know, they're trying... Screw you. That's what you should say. It's none of your business. And if more Irish people did that, we'd have a much healthier society. And that's how they got away with the lockdowns. What will the neighbours think? There was a chap I was talking to in Dublin, lived on a very nice neighbourhood, and the committee came around the first day and gave them sheets of paper. One was one was red and one was green. If you had someone with in your house with COVID, you were to stick the green poster on the window, no, the red poster on the window, so to show that you have the plague. This is the residents' committee. If everything was fine, you put up the green one. When the committee came around to his house with their masks on them and holding the paper like this with gloves on them, put up the red one if you have someone with coat. He told them to go get stuffed. I'm not paying a mortgage to be in your police state. You know, the suburbia, you know, that kind of thing. So that's our collective shadow as a people. But we all have a collective shadow inside, something we haven't confronted, something we may have hurt in the past. A hurt inside us that we haven't fully resolved. Something that was done to us, but we're forgiving them because that's a big thing in Ireland. You know, did you see what happened at the wedding? You know, Charlie, he got really drunk. He wrecked the wedding for everybody. He smashed the place up and destroyed everybody's day. So how are you going to punish him? You know, Charlie. And this is how they get away with it. You know, that no one has the balls to walk up to them and say, what you did is disgraceful. You're not ever coming to my wedding, what you did, ever again. No, but what will the neighbours think if we don't bring Charlie in? They'll be, you know, we're this kind of thing that Christian Morris talks about. It's so true. Oh, Jesus is true in this country. It's so true. And they used that during the lockdown. And those of us, I bet most of you who who said, the hell with all that stuff, I'm living my life the way I want to. I bet many of you had those things in your life where you said, I don't give a shit what the neighbours are saying about me anymore. I don't give a shit what my mother thinks about me marrying this fella. I don't give a shit what my son thinks of me. Because they gave up on that. And they actually had a better life because of it. Because playing ball and compromising can actually put you in the grave. There's lots of people who did the right thing, sure as me cousin, who ended up in the grave because of it. And that's they knew that when they started their own. Every country had its own little effective method of this controlling and mind controlling the population. And in Ireland it was, what will the neighbours think? Now, I had none of these problems. I was walking around where I live without a mask. I hadn't got a problem at all. You know why? Because the locals were saying, that's Thomas, that's what he's like. But I was a free, liberated man because of it. Because, you know Thomas, you know what he's like. You'll never change him, he's his own man. But not once was I thrown out of a place or anything for that reason. Because it was almost like I had a superpower. And my superpower was not giving a shit what they thought. You know, it was not caring what they thought. Not being bothered by what they thought. Built up over a number of years to the point where, you know, there was a film, I can't remember what it was called, but it wasn't a very good film, but the plot of the movie was beautiful. It was an English film. And I think it was about a couple who couldn't have children because the wife had cancer when they were younger, or something. But it was this huge family secret. Here's Deirdre and John. God loved them. They've no kids. They've no kids. God loved them. Something not right there. Something wrong with them. Just kind of carry on. When through no fault of their own, for an unfortunate thing, the woman wasn't able to have a baby. And at the end of the film, the husband breaks down and has like a nervous breakdown in front of all of them. And it says, we can't have children because she has a medical condition. Now will you please get out of my life? And it's wonderful, I forget what the name of the film was, but it was an amazing scene. Because all the years of like the neighbours and the friends and the family going, oh yeah, it's funny, you know, that kind of thing. The suburban thing. They didn't care anymore. They just didn't care. That's not the same thing as being selfish. Being selfish is getting along to get along and destroying yourself. Because those things are like a cancer. They build around other things. They grow and they become other things and new things. Now, you will find that the people who are, this whole thing, oh, he's a happy-go-lucky character, he doesn't give a shit. That's why. It's not that he's selfish. It's not that she's selfish. But they're not going to spend the gift of getting 80 or 90 years on this planet to make others happy or to fit in what they think of them. And the liberation of that is incredible. And that's how it was for me in COVID. I was very angry about what was being done. But at the same time, too, I had no problems. Not once was I... There was one, I can't say it because it's quite dirty and there's children here, but there was one thing that I did have a fellow in a post office that I confronted him. And what I said to him, I can't repeat here. But I gave it up to him, and the whole place burst out laughing. And no one was offended. They all burst out laughing. But this guy was standing behind me going, oh, there's always one. There's always one. Here we are with our masks. You know, this type, this like oafus, pompous gobshite. Every town has them. Oh yeah? Here I am, mask. Where's his mask? Always one, isn't there? I won't turn around what I said to them because there's children here. But the whole place burst out laughing when I gave it up to them large. And they were all wearing masks. But it was like a moment of freedom, a moment of liberation. And guess what? I started to see less people around the town wearing masks the next day. Because they had heard about it and the absurdity of it made them realise it is nonsense. It is nonsense. So that's what we have to do. We have to make sure they never do this to us ever again. That they never do this to us ever again. And call them out on it. And the hell with the neighbours. But if this is what we had now, and where doctors and nurses are making TikTok dancing videos, there's no bodies in the streets. They have cases, but not actual casualties. And you have a situation where they terrorised people who worked in care homes and the old were left to die inside them. That will be one of the great... Your grandchildren, that little girl's grandchildren will be talking about this. Do you know back in 2020, they locked the elderly people in the care homes and left them to die alone? And they will talk about that the way we talk about the Magdalen laundries now. And the guilty will have all moved on, collected their pensions, and all got on. Our job is never, ever to let that to be forgotten. I know I bore the pistol out of people by going on about this, but till the day I will die, I will constantly remind people that the human race was attacked by the establishment in every country in order to have complete control over us. And they did it with television and the lie. And that we have to be very forceful. It's the easiest thing in the world to say no. The easiest thing in the world. And I'm not going to go into any kind of like the aftermath of the prickly pear, the needlecraft, the cup of tea, whatever the code word we're using for it is. But history is still to play out. And your job as a person, my job as a person, is to try and end up on the right side of history. And the way you do that is you follow what your instincts tell you and not what the man on the television tells you. So thanks very much for that.